Last night I was sitting at a dinner with a group of friends, and the conversation turned into asking ourselves, what's the nature of God? And one perspective that I was hearing essentially stated that because of the religion that some people practice, we were essentially trained to believe that our beliefs may be the true beliefs and everybody else has gotten something wrong. I attribute that to the fact that if you were born in a specific location, have a specific ancestry, your parents were teaching you specific religious values, you tend to believe that. And I'm going back to my own experience. As a child, I was raised Catholic. And back when I was a child, I wasn't questioning a law that was taught to me by anything that I consider an authority. For me, the authority was the teacher at school, my parents, my grandparents, my aunts, my uncles. And then when I was brought to church, the priest became the authority on the spiritual religious realm. So anything that the priest was saying was essentially true to me. However, very quickly, when I was young, I was always interested in things other than what my day-to-day life was bringing me. So I was always interested about specific religions and what were their teachings and what was going on with that. And since age 10, I started questioning and I went on this spiritual journey. First of all, I started understanding that magic may not be something that is just in fantasy books. Maybe it is something that we all dwell with. I started looking at some of the religions and their esoteric versions. So, for instance, for Christianity, a lot of the esoteric traditions are actually based on popular traditions. I've noticed that within my own family, there were actually traditions that were probably leading back to 500, 1,000 years prior, and traditions that were kept as Catholic, but in reality, they were very much pagan. And a lot of people considered those as part of the superstition, the popular superstition, but then once you start looking into it, you can actually see where the roots came from. So being Italian, a lot of the roots came from Roman and Greek history. And we see still throughout our ceremonies, even though we call them Catholic, we still see some remnants of the pagan tradition. So for instance, in my hometown, every February 3rd, between February 3rd and February 5th, our matron saint of the city leaves the cathedral and gets brought in procession. And you may think that happens in a lot of Catholic traditions. However, when we take the saint out, and this, by the way, this is Saint Agatha. She's the saint that protects the town of Catania. When we take the saint in procession, what we actually see is that we accompany the saint with objects called candelora. And the name candelora sounds similar to candle, right? And so many times look at the etymology of a word to figure out what we're talking about exactly. So those candeloras get brought in procession right next to the saint. It's the saint statue, and then we have these figures that are actually phallic shaped. And you may think, why do Catholics care about phallic shaped figures? Well, that tradition actually comes from the cult of Cybele. Cybele was a Turkish goddess that was, so an Anatolian goddess that was imported into Greece, and then the Greeks brought those cults to Sicily. And the priests that were dedicating their lives to Cybele were actually connecting themselves onto a tree, doing these dances that were extremely euphoric and violent, and they were connecting their members to the tree until the members will fall off. That was part of a sacrifice they were doing for the goddess. And then every time the goddess was brought in procession, what we would see is that the goddess would be constantly accompanied by figures that were phallic shaped to remember the sacrifice. The sacrifice refers to the sacrifice of the god Attis, who actually died and essentially resurrected. And we have a lot of that tradition in pagan history. So when I first started to understand that perhaps my beliefs weren't necessarily based on the truth, I started digging a little bit deeper. And we're talking about the fact that I started this process when I was 10, and by the time I discovered about a Sibyl and the cult of Sibyl, I was probably 11, 12. And I credit for that my instructor of Latin. My instructor of Latin, she was an absolutely amazing human being. Not only she taught me the language, I studied Latin for 5 years, but also she taught me all of the history. She was also my history teacher. When you start questioning your own religion, you figure, well, maybe this is not just the only thing that may be not true fully. And Agatha was a real historical figure. She really existed. It remains a truly it remains that we take in procession throughout the city. The problem is that the tradition itself and the days where the tradition falls exactly into the time when we used to worship Sibyl. To add to that, the actual cathedral of the town was built upon the Temple of Venus. And that's another pagan artifact, and we just buried it under a church. So the more I think about it, the more I look into the situation and realize that I need to question the entire paradigm behind my religion. And that's what I did. I was really young in middle school, and I started questioning things, and many kids did not appreciate it because I was always digging deeper than I should have. And many of the kids that I was in class with, but also even the adults, they didn't fully understand why I was digging deeper. There were a lot of issues with that, including the fact that I kept going to church, and many times my beliefs were questioned as satanic because the people who were in church with me didn't understand why my beliefs were different. The question became the following: do you believe in at least one deity? And the answer is yes. But in a sense, I'm not monotheistic. I believe in multiple gods. And we started questioning the nature of deity. So going back into the dinner of last night, the nature of deity, according to organized religion, is always considered something that's above us, making all of the decisions for us, and we kind of live in his or her kingdom, and we operate as servants of that being. And that's the belief that we find in the three major religions in Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. In my personal experience, once again, I started Catholic, and then very quickly I became a pagan, and I'm pretty much a pagan until today, with the difference is that I believe in Christ too. And the reason why my beliefs are so different is that I've actually done personal research, meditation, trips into the unknown. I've had visions of different realities, and I've studied a lot of philosophies as well, and I watch the content of a lot of spiritualists out there too. And what I've realized is that the nature of God is misunderstood. I said this many times on my channel before. We are God. We are divine. The eternal flame that we worship is actually within ourselves. And the person that perhaps had the best answer to that was Jesus Christ. Now, I'm not 100% sure whether Jesus was truly an historical figure, whether he existed or not, but I've read his teachings. And when I say I read his teaching, I didn't just read the Gospels. The Gospels were essentially nitpicked. There was the Church of Constantine, the Emperor of Rome, through the work of a council, the Council of Nicaea. They ended up picking specific books and discarding others. The Christians that weren't fitting within the definition of the new religion of the empire were essentially considered heretics. They were essentially removed from the conversation. The result of that is that the teachings of Jesus are profoundly misunderstood. And when a few decades back we found the scrolls of the Dead Sea Scrolls, that was a huge discovery for us. And the reason why it was a huge discovery for us is that all of the gnostic knowledge about Jesus and his true teachings came to surface. And in that knowledge, Jesus explains exactly why he refers to himself as the Son of God. It's not just because we have this Trinity, this idea that God incarnated himself, turned into Jesus, and we also have a Holy Spirit, this three-in-one figure that's actually very pagan. It's not just because of that. It's because Jesus is teaching us that we all are divine. We all are God. We all have our own divine flame within ourselves, and we need to discover it. So when Jesus talks about the kingdom of heaven, it's actually talking about a reality that's inside of us, not a reality that we will find once we pass into the better life one day. And that solidified a little bit of my thinking. And I started understanding, by combining the gnostic tradition with some of the teachings from Kabbalah and some of the visions and experiences I've had personally, that when we talk about God and the nature of God, we're actually talking about everything, the nature of everything. We ourselves are God. Our own entire reality is something that we're participant of. We create our own reality. We manifest it, whether you're conscious about it or unconscious about it. Reality is an extension of yourself. And there's a lot of things that I can pull out of biology as well, because essentially the reality that we see with our eyes is nothing but the interpretation of the occipital lobe of the reality around us. We take some light frequencies, we analyze them, and we turn into information that it's the word we see. And we do the same with hearing. We do the same with all of our senses. So this reinforces the idea that reality is truly something, is the product of our brain from the biology perspective. But when we look at the spiritual perspective, reality is something that we're manifesting minute after minute, second after second. So when it comes to the nature of God and talking about the ever-living God, we're not actually talking about this old man sitting in a cloud making decisions for us like a king, like a ruler. We're talking about something that we can find within ourselves. And that's the key to spiritual liberation there. Once you understand that you're divine, you understand that the cycle of life and death doesn't truly exist. We are divine, therefore we are immortal. So a lot of the answers are simply written in those books. They're accessible for everyone. There's a lot of material on YouTube. You can buy books. There are audibles. There are podcasts about it. But there's a lot of material that will talk about how this is actually what the Gnostic believed. And it's accessible for everyone. It's public knowledge. It's no longer the result of a secretive group that practiced in the dark. So that conversation, I believe, for somebody who was particularly stuck in dogma and the idea of organized religion, and this is what my priest, this is what my rabbi, this is what my imam is saying, and therefore I'm going to believe exactly. That's essentially stage one. When you're taking stage one, you're understanding religion, you feel that's something that identifies you. And because it identifies you, it's giving a characteristic to your ego, and therefore it's turning you into a more egotistical person. And not only that, it's dividing you from the rest of the flock. Now, whenever you start questioning those beliefs, that's an important stage. It can be considered a stage of rebellion. But that important stage will actually lead you to true knowledge, actually understanding your own experience with God, because it's all internal. And once you understand your own experience with God, you're actually giving yourself the benefit of truly experiencing what this teaching, regardless of what religion you are, but you're truly benefiting from the teachings. You're making it something that's truly part of you, and you're becoming a source of light for the world. Question of beliefs, understand that perhaps things that may seem far-fetched, like the idea of supernatural, um, the idea of magic, a lot of that is being explored currently by quantum physics. There have been a lot of experiments that have been done on this topic, even by the U.S. government. So this is all material that's easily accessible for you. So my video wants to inspire you to do your own research, find your own self, and find your own version of God.